So the Gray Zone actually had a discussion about mass shootings, and I thought this was a really interesting talk. Of course, this is coming off of the mass shootings that we just had recently, right? So we had the one in Buffalo, the Texas school shooting, and they had a discussion about this on the Gray Zone, and they were talking about what was happening in this country before we started having mass shootings. And I think this is an important message for people to hear. So I want to give a shout out to those of you that made me aware of this clip. So this is Max and Aaron, and they're talking about what we used to have before all these mass shootings started. So listen to this. I hope there's no music. I don't think, was there music at the beginning? No, here we go.
A segue into just one other thing I wanted to address because it's a live stream. I got to get out of here pretty soon. But we live in a very violent culture. We live in an imperialist country and an imperialist culture that is just awash in violence. There are a lot of people trying to score cheap political points over the wave of mass shootings that we've seen. We've seen 3 major mass shootings across the country. Everyone's trying to, well, you know, professional political operatives are trying to point the finger at their political enemies. But we can't point the finger at one person or one.
I just want to jump in here. I believe he's talking about Beto O'Rourke and Governor Abbott, because I talked about that too on RBN, how I felt like Beto O'Rourke made this more political. He made it more about him and about his campaign instead of being there for the children and being there for the parents in the community. I felt like he made it about him, and I felt like it was theater. So I think that's probably who he's referring to.
Factor. And I want to think about it historically. These slaughters, most recently, I think 21 children were slaughtered in a classroom in Texas. Think about it in terms of the killing of hope in this country when revolutionary leaders, reformist politicians who stood up for the poor and stood up against the Vietnam War in the 1960s started to shake the foundations of power in this country. And one by one, they were gunned down, supposedly by lone gunmen, advancing the interests of the warmongers, the war state, and the kind of people who right now are in a playground for the rich, a hyper-securitized playground secured by 5,000 high-powered, 5,000 militarized cops in Davos at the World Economic Forum. Since that wave of assassinations and since the neutralization of revolutionary movements in the 1960s and early 70s, we haven't seen those kind of assassinations of leaders or attempts on the lives of leaders. Instead, we've seen the working.
I just want to jump in here for just a second. That's at 2:18. I'm going to take it back to 2:15. So he's talking about how we haven't seen those types of like assassinations that we've seen, like JFK, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. We haven't seen that, right, since then, right? And I would also add that we really haven't had leaders like that since then. We haven't had a revolutionary in this country since MLK, since Malcolm X, since, you know, the civil rights movement, those civil rights leaders and activists. We really haven't had anyone else like that, not outside of politics. And even the ones on the political end, well, I guess we can all say Bernie Sanders per se was saying he was leading a revolution, but we saw he left that movement rather quickly after he suspended his campaign. So I think that's an important point that he mentioned. Like, we have not seen that because we haven't had those leaders since then. So listen to this part here.
Of leaders. Instead, we've seen the working class kill its bloodbaths within the working class. The killing of America as the country was swamped by corporate America with high-powered weapons, with psychotropic pharmaceuticals, and with a nihilistic, digitized culture of violence that now can be experienced in virtual reality through the metaverse and the Oculus. Simulation shooter games. And I think this toxic brew is what is leading to these mass shootings we're seeing week after week, along with the legitimization by Democrats who say that they are anti-gun of massive arms shipments to literal Nazis and jihadists from Syria to Ukraine. And so I wanted to close with the word.
I feel like we live in a society now that promotes violence, and not saying that we've never had violence in this country before. We have. America's always been a pretty violent country, but I feel like over the past decade or so, well, no, we can actually start back in the late 90s. I feel like it's increased. It's become incredibly worse. But I feel like also our country promotes violence. So he mentioned the video games, and I know some people feel different about the video games. Some people feel like that shouldn't make you want to go out and do those things or whatever. But I think that one of the differences I did notice living abroad and living in the United States, violence is promoted in this country, whether it's in the entertainment business, whether it's in the music business. And when I lived in Germany, I felt like it wasn't promoted, if that makes sense. And you have to ask yourself, why is it okay for this country to promote violence, but it's not okay to have certain discussions in this country that can actually protect you and save your life? And I'll give an example. It's okay for this country to promote violence in the entertainment industry, right? You see all kinds of things on TV now or in the movies. But at the same time, there are schools and certain districts in this country where, as a teacher, you can't even talk about sex education. You can't even talk about the reproductive system. You can't talk about that. And then you'll have teenagers out there who may not have parents that are involved in their lives, right? And so nobody's talking to them about this. And so they don't know what to do in terms of how to protect themselves. They don't know anything about birth control. They think they do, but they don't. And so they listen to their friends and think that these things that their friends say would actually work. Rumors about birth control yourself. There are certain places in this country, you can't even have those discussions. I know, I used to live in the South, you guys, where they don't even want you to talk about it. But it's okay to promote violence all the time. And it's all around us. It just seems kind of backwards. You would think we would want to teach people, yes, this is your reproductive system. This is how you can protect yourself. You would think we would want to prepare people for that. But there are places in this country where, no, you can't even talk about it. Did you know that in the United States, there are still dry counties in 2022? For those of you listening and you're like, what the hell is a dry county? A dry county means you can't serve alcohol, you can't buy alcohol. In 2022, I feel like that should be a personal decision, right? Why is that? So we have to ask ourselves, like, why does this country have it backwards like that? Like, I never understood that. Whereas like in Germany per se, it was the opposite. It was perfectly fine to have those conversations and those discussions, whether it was in the school place, church, wherever. You were told to talk about it. You were told not to be ashamed to have those discussions. And the violent extremist part was not promoted the way it is in the United States. So that's something I never understood. But that's me. Tay, did you say South Carolina? Yeah, I went to college in South Carolina. Tay knows what's up. Tay knows what's up. Someone just said something. Oh, it's Tay again. Thank you. Signed, an educator who wishes they could teach sex ed as it should be taught, an open, comprehensive discussion. It just never made any sense to me. I don't understand it. It's weird. But let's go back into the clip.
Words of someone who might have been president on violence in this country. This is Robert F. Kennedy Sr.'s speech, The Mindless Menace of Violence.
Violence breeds violence. Repression breeds retaliation. And only a cleansing of our whole society can remove this sickness from our souls. For there is another kind of violence, slower, but just as deadly destructive as the shot or the bomb in the night. This is the violence of institutions, indifference, inaction, and decay. This is the violence that afflicts the poor, that poisons relations between men because their skin has different colors. This is the slow destruction of a child by hunger.
I just want to add in here for a second when he mentioned about violence and the poor. Again, it goes back to the poverty issue, right? Because what did I tell you often on this show? Most crime is poverty driven. So if you fix the poverty issue, you can greatly reduce crime, right? We don't see, this is why you don't see as much crime in rich neighborhoods. Not saying there's zero crime, but this is why you don't see as much crime in those neighborhoods. A lot of times people will say it's racial per se. They'll say, oh, it only happens in Black communities. What kind of communities though? What's the income? What's the poverty level in those communities? Are people struggling financially in those communities? It's usually because of class. I'll go back in.
Schools without books and homes without heat in the winter. This is the breaking of a man's spirit by denying him the chance to stand as a father and as a man amongst other men. But we can perhaps remember, if only for a time, that those who live with us are our brothers, and surely we can begin to work a little harder to bind up the wounds among us and to become in our hearts brothers and countrymen once again.
And I want to remind you, they killed him to make sure that that would not happen. It's really sad when you think about it. Who knows how he would have been? Who knows, right? I want you to think about the time period that he was living in. During that time, my grandparents used to tell me about this. During that time, people were able to survive off of just one income. One spouse could go to work and the other one could stay home. And guess what? They could take care of the children and they didn't have to pay for daycare because one of them was able to stay at home and take care of the kids. They were able to actually buy homes with one income during that time. Things were so much different back then. So economically, things should have only improved more from there. But then we get into Reaganomics and we go to the trickle down, and that's a whole nother show, right? But technically, things should have improved economically, but it didn't. So here we are, 2022. And now, instead of having one person work and the other one stay at home and take care of the kids, in fact, most of my friends, both of them have to work, whether they have professional jobs or not. Now we enter late stage capitalism where both spouses have to work. Most of the time, both of them have to work in order to get by. Now we go to a time where people of my generation, a lot of us millennials and Gen Z, can't afford to buy a house, can't afford to start families unless you have some help from someone else. So how did we go from being able to raise a family on one income to not being able to even start a family, and both partners have to work? This is late stage capitalism. This goes to show you how times have changed and how economically things actually got worse for people in this country. At the end of the day, it all goes back to capitalism. Now, I know some people are not anti-capitalist, but I am. Because I don't think that you can put any type of guardrails on capitalism. I haven't seen it work. And I've heard people say that, but I've never seen it work. Because there's always someone at the top and the people at the bottom are exploited. We would all have to be on even level, and we're not.
Well, soon after that speech, as we all know, RFK Sr. was gunned down and became a victim to the mindless menace of violence. And maybe perhaps his assassination was not so mindless. Perhaps it was more calculated than we've been told. But in any case.
Yeah, as soon as he said we all need to come together, they were like, time for him to go. This is the same thing we saw with Fred Hampton, with MLK. Actually, MLK, before he was assassinated, what was he talking about? He brought up reparations. He brought up UBI. He was trying to unionize the workers. What happened with Malcolm X? The moment Malcolm X decided that he wasn't going to, hate white people anymore, he said, no, that's not the right thinking. I've been going about this the wrong way, and I don't think that's right. He decided he wanted to change and say, everybody, maybe we should all come together. They killed him.
I wanted to close with those words. Thanks for being with us for these 2 hours. Thanks a lot, Aaron. We'll be back next week. Peace.
Oh, whoops. I forgot to go to the beginning. There was something I was going to say right about here.
Political points over the wave of mass shootings that we've seen. We've seen 3 major mass shootings across the country. Everyone's trying to, professional political operatives are trying to point the finger at their political enemies.
That part right there. And this is what people are doing. And it's not just, I mentioned Beto and Governor Abbott, but it's not just those two. It's also happening in DC as well. You have the Republicans pointing fingers at the Democrats pointing fingers at the Republicans. These are the people who are supposed to be our political leaders in this country. And they're just pointing fingers back and forth at each other. It's always someone else's fault. Instead of thinking about their political ideology, after something like this has happened, what they should be doing is coming together and figuring out how they can try to prevent this from happening in the future, because we've had so many mass shootings in this country. It's become normalized now, and that's not good. That's what they should be doing. But you can't even get your House representatives and your senators in DC to put the stupid red-blue game to the side to come together for the greater good, to protect the children in this country so the kids can go to school and not have to worry about being shot in the classroom. You can't even get them to do that. These are the people that are supposed to be leading our country, and they don't even want to protect the children, let alone the adults. So again, we have entered late stage capitalism. I've seen selfishness before in this country, but the level of selfishness that I see now in this country, I feel like it has increased over the years. Everyone's just out for their self. Everyone's looking at their own pockets. They just want to get paid. When I see that they can't even come to some type of agreement to help protect children, that's when I know the game is rigged and that they don't care. They don't care about us. They care about their self. And that's how it's been for a long time. And I think it took something like this happening again with those kids, with the police department not intervening the way that they should have, to really wake people up that not only did the politicians not care about your children, the police who are supposed to serve and protect, they don't care about your children enough to the point that they would do their job because they wanted to protect their self first. And this is the country that we are living in today. There's a lot of greed. There's a lot of selfishness. And this is exactly why I keep telling you, you need to let go of the red-blue game. I talked about this on RBN earlier today. Do you know they're making bunkers for rich people for the next pandemic? They're making bunkers for them, and it's only going to be for rich people, only for them, not for us. We would still have to suffer. That's what's happening right now. We can't even get the address for it. We can't even get the address. You have to buy in to get the address for the location. They're protecting themselves. They will not protect us. And that includes all those politicians that you have in DC. You go ahead and put them in that category too, because a lot of them are paid. They've been doing this for a long time. So if you think that your state representative, we have some type of catastrophe in this country, or we have another pandemic come in, if you think that our state representatives are going to come and help and save us and take us to safety, they're not. They're going to look out for themselves. They'll be going right over to that bunker and they will leave you to suffer and die. And this is why you have to build community. This is exactly why we have to help each other. This is why we tell you, you need to do mutual aid. This is why we tell you, you need to do direct action. This is why we tell you that if you want to vote, go ahead and vote, but do not expect much change in your life from it. Because at the end of the day, no one is going to look out for you but you and the people in your community. And that does not include the politicians. They will sell you out to make sure that they live and they survive. And they will not care if you or your family members die. The police aren't going to help you either. Look at how they just let the kids die in the school. They don't care. These are the systems that we have in this country. And they've been this way for a long time. We have been trying to solve the problem by replacing the people. We do this every time, but nothing improves. Because at the end of the day, the main problem is not the people. It's the systems that we have in this society. That's the problem. So how do you fix it? You have to break the system. And you don't break the system by joining the system. You break the system from the outside and you tear the shit down. That is how you do it. So when people come to you and they tell you you're foolish if you think that you're going to accomplish something through direct action, you remind them of the civil rights movement. When people come to you and they tell you you're foolish if you think you're going to start some type of a movement or some type of a third party org or whatever in this country, you're stupid. That doesn't make any sense. You need to remind them that there have been several organizations that have been started in this country that were told from the very beginning that nothing would ever come of it. And then you need to look at the people who are constantly telling you that. And then you need to look at their class. Because most of the time, these are people that either come for money, they have money, they're not losing any money, and they're damn sure not worried about your money.